I recently got the opportunity to fly into Nashville right after that crazy ice storm that the whole, kind of like US was talking about, and ride around with Tim Richards from RPM Titan as he went door to door inspecting things after a natural disaster and all these different kinds of things. And it was a really, really great experience to spend time with first of all, a great storyteller, a well-formed entrepreneur who knows exactly what he wants out of his business and his life. And out of all the conversations we had, I think the most compelling one was when he told me something about not wanting to grow himself broke. So I thought, we got to have this conversation on the podcast. And this is what that conversation is. I go over with Tim essentially this approach to why growth tends to harm many, many businesses when they think it's actually their way out, and his approach to it. And he's got a really profitable business at a low door count that he runs with just him and his wife and now his son. And I think there's a lot to learn from Tim's lesson here in profitability over growth at all cost and the danger of growing yourself broke. Enjoy this awesome conversation with the incomparable Southern storytelling gentleman, Tim Richards. Welcome to the Property Management Frame Breakers podcast. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez, and I am here to introduce you to the folks in the property management space that have broken the frame of what you may believe was possible. This podcast is presented by Vendoroo. It is your all-in-one AI solution for resolving your maintenance needs. Let's go. You and I had a really great conversation in the car around faith. And, one of my big takeaways and something that I learned from you, which I really, really echoed with, is this idea that, faith is many things to many people. I think for the two of us, it has given us a mental scaffolding that allows us to see the world in a way where it's easier to look at the potential for good things to happen and why they happen than to just assume everything is crap. I think that there is a big part of, which I think is real, right? I think there's a real fear around the effect of AI and all this stuff that is framed and anchored to all these sci-fi movies that we've written. I think that's particularly dangerous because AI is basically a pattern matching thing of things that have happened in the past, not necessarily a predictor of the future. If that whole thing is going to be true, I just don't know what there is to do about it, right? I don't know what there is to do about that part of it. The same way that I don't know how to fix the Middle East or Americans getting along. And I find that the more that I focus on things I can't control, the more I'm will put me in a depressive state. So I look for what are the best case scenarios that can happen, and I focus on stuff like that. And I think with AI, there's just so much conversation around are we headed to the Matrix or to Terminator 2 Judgment Day? When I think the useful conversation is what does this mean for me right now that I can do for my business and to improve my life and improve society and all these different kinds of things, right? So did the world change on Friday, or is this a new, flashpoint of entertainment that you're yes, the world changed Friday. Has it changed in how we entertain ourselves, or is it changed in a reality of these agents being connected and all these different kinds of things? I don't know. I also don't find a lot of space in my brain for predicting how the world will end as much as how I want to show up from here till then, right? So that's
we share the same POV. I mean, it's coming. We can't stop it. We might as well use it and figure out how it benefits us and benefits our clients and society in general. And it's coming.
Yeah.
The genie is out of the bottle. There's no putting it back in.
Whatever's coming is coming. We just don't know what that is, right? Can it be a post-apocalyptic future? Sure. Anyways. So
Mad Max Thunderdome.
Yeah. Listen, I think I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think I'm fairly certain that that's in our future in the next 100 years because of climate. So like whether AI is going to accelerate that or not, that might happen too, right?
Never
Anyways,
know.
that being said, in the next 12
Okay.
months, where I think agentic capabilities are headed, I think that I think in the next 12 months, we hit a tipping point of people truly understanding the new version of this thing and how to actually adapt it, right? Like I think right now, we're still at the point where television came out and the first television shows were essentially radio shows played on TV. It wasn't until people started figuring out how do we make content that's native to this medium that really started succeeding. And I think we're still playing radio shows on TV, most of us. I think that that's affected by the whole innovator's dilemma thing. I think in most industries, I think it's kind of like in property management where there is existing software providers that have served the majority of the market for a long time. So they've gained the trust to tell you what's coming. They're incentivized to kind of like anchor to the past, not reverse engineer the future. So
Right.
the things that they're coming out is what most people experience. Those providers have the best relationships with the existing influencers and the media creators of the space. So like we're really over indexed to to the solutions that are coming out that are anchored to the past as opposed to reverse engineering the future. I just think we're right now at the moment where the stats and the data and like there's going to be a moment in the next 12 months where people are going to be like, holy crap, this is really happening, and like some people are doing this, and I gotta figure out how to do this thing natively. I think that happens in the next 12 months. What do you think?
That's a great take. I agree with you. I mean, I'm excited. I think I can see, particularly for small operators like us, how we can leverage that to it's a force multiplier. I mean, how we can leverage that to serve a much larger audience in terms of the number of properties, number of owners we relate with a lot fewer headcount. I mean, when you look at fixed rate scaling, I mean, again, it's a force multiplier. You can't deny that when you look at it.
How do you describe fixed cost scaling, Tim? Because I've done my best at describing this, and I think it would come better from someone who is in the business and has your credibility.
Well, it's just like, when we were in the car, I always told you, my grandfather always told me that if your outgo exceeds your income, then your upkeep will be your downfall. And the trick to amassing wealth is while your income does this, your expenses do this. And with fixed rate scaling, if you can control your cost per unit instead of your expenses grow, either perpendicular to, or I'm sorry, parallel to, or even in some cases edging up past. There's a lot of companies who've grown too fast and failed because they failed to contain expenses as their income grew. Walmart's one of those classic examples of what happens to a lot of small businesses. I've heard the analogy. A guy builds a great fishing lure. He makes a few of them in his shop building, takes them down to the local bait shop. People start buying them. Like, yeah, this thing's good. I can catch bass with this thing. This is awesome. And so he says, there's like, you need to mass produce fish. You need to figure out how to take this to the people. You need to go to Bentonville, Arkansas and visit with the people up there at Walmart. And so he goes to Walmart. He pitches his product. Like, great. We'll take. Can you make 500 of these, 1,000 of these? We'll test pilot them in one of our stores. So he and his friends, they sit in the shop building at his farm, and they build these lures, and they put them in a box and ship them off to Bentonville, Arkansas. And then Walmart test pilots them in the store, and they fly off the shelf. Next thing you know, Bentonville's calling, "Hey, fella, this is you may have something here. Can you make 10,000 of these, and we're going to try them in a few other stores?" And he says, sure. And so they call in more favors and more friends. They sit in the shop, they build all these lures, and they, ship them to Bentonville. They fly off the shelves. Next thing you know, Walmart says, we want 100,000 of these lures. And we know you don't necessarily have the capacity to do that. So we're going to front you the resource money to amp up your capacity so you can deliver this to us. And so he accepts their loan and he hires more people, and they lease a warehouse and they put a bunch of tables together, and they buy the raw materials, and they're all assembling these lures, and they box them up, and the UPS truck comes by to his warehouse now because he's not a little guy anymore, and they ship them all to Bentonville. Next thing you know, Walmart says, we want 1 million of these. Oh, and we're going to front you some more money, except now instead of giving you $3.50 per unit, we're only going to give you 2. But you're doing a lot of volume, and we can see that you're going to, easily we could have orders where we might ask for, 10 million of these. And he's got stars in his eyes, and he's seeing dollar signs, and he's bought a nice bass boat, and he's, maybe built that house that he and mom have been talking about building, and his kids are in private school now, and he's got all these expenses he didn't have before. And then Walmart comes back in and says, okay, we want 10 million of these, but we're only going to give you 50 cents a lure. He's had. They've got him because he has overextended himself based on bigger is better. Well, bigger's not better when you have given up your leverage. And when somebody who's doing business with you understands that you have overextended yourself, because if Walmart pulls the plug and says, we're done with you, no more orders. Is Target going to buy your lure? Dick's Sporting Goods going to buy your lure? Academy? Who's going to bail you out? You're going to have to lay people off. You may have to downsize your warehouse. I mean, you see what I'm saying about growing yourself broke?
That looks like growing yourself broke, which is going to essentially be the title of this episode, right? That's what we're here to talk about.
Broke is a negative, nasty term. I don't want to fixate on broke.
Yeah. Me neither. And listen, classic, as I've grown to understand, classic Tim Richards storytelling. I loved it. Tie it back to property management, right? Like, what does that look like in property management?
I thought that, I can't remember if it was Mark Brow or Tony Klein said it best. And Catherine and I were talking about this last night. When you do the math, okay, if you hire a teammate, somebody in your community to come work, to be an employee, anybody worth having is going to cost $5,000 a month, $60K a year. And that's before you've paid FUTA and SUTA and all those other things. In reality, they're probably $85,000 a year. But just for a nice round figure, I will say they cost $60,000, $5,000 a month. Well, you look at our situation right now, our average rent is $3,037 a month per unit. So if we assume adding that player to our team is $60,000, we have to add 16 and a half doors in order to pay for that one seat. So say we're at 100 doors and we hire that person. Well, we're already back to 83 and a half. So we've already, now granted that this person could be a great force multiplier for us eventually, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years down the road. But what if they decide, you know what? I really hate this. This isn't for me. 6 months down the road, all those breadcrumbs down the path. And guess what you've done? You've sacrificed 16 and a half doors for something with no return. That's a huge risk to a business. And it's a decision that business owners make every day, because you have to have enough talent to accomplish the task at hand. But if you can, rather than take the risk of that may or may not work, and you have agentic AI that doesn't sleep, doesn't get sick, doesn't go on vacation, doesn't ask for a raise yet till they figure out that they're self-aware, you don't have that same risk in making that investment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me. And I, one of the things that when I think about your average rent, I feel like most property managers would love to have your average rent, right? Like you're operating in the like really nice housing class of one of the most expensive counties in the country, right? So like that could be 32 doors for the average property manager is the first thing I think of. But yeah, that makes perfect sense, man. When you explained that to me in the car, I had never really done the math of like $60,000, the $60,000 investment that's actually closer to like a $8,500,000 investment. To me, I've only conceptualized it just like in an abstract fashion of investing a salary, getting that person up to speed until they're paying off that salary. There's a period of time thereafter where they're a force multiplier, but then you've grown enough that now you got to go for another kind of like round of that, right? And you're, as the business owner, your take-home income is oscillating during that time, and that's in the best case scenario, right? Like that's assuming that you get it right.
Everything works out
with each hire, right? And that they stay for 5, 7 years, right? Like I think 7 years is a pretty optimistic time of employment for anybody, right? Like these days.
Exactly.
So it's that kind of return. And I wonder what, as I think about our friend Justin Anderson and talking about finance, I wonder what that looks like on what does that 7-year IRR look like, on an investment like that?
You hope they're good. That's for sure.
If there's something that I unabashedly love about Tim Richards is his ability to illustrate a point with that story. And, that Walmart fishing lure story is a perfect example of how he makes these great points around the pain of hiring and the idea that people bring uncertainty. So if you're one of these companies that is in growth mode, and you are looking to grow, but also limit that uncertainty downside, I highly suggest you start thinking about AI as your next and maybe last hire. You may have everybody you already have on your team that you need to grow, and all they need is this new way of doing it with this agentic AI, handling the mundane stuff so they can focus on the high leverage. That's what we have built Vendoroo to do. We have built Vendoroo to scale with you in a way that limits the downside of adding more headcount as you continue to grow while maintaining or even elevating, right? Like definitely elevating the floor of the service and then elevating your people to those like things that really, really move the needle. After you listen to the rest of this podcast, just know Tim is a very, very happy customer and we'd love to make you a very, very happy customer. Go to vendoroo.ai and let's get you going. Huh? All right. Enjoy the rest of the show. You hope it's good. Talk to me, Tim. Is this concept of mathing the math out like this, something that you lived before being a property management entrepreneur? Did you live this in your insurance thing? Is this something that once you started reading about it, you started going down it? Give me the origin story of you being like, oh yeah, fixed cost scaling. Maybe I gifted you those words, but how did it ring true to you? What was your lived experience of struggling with this?
Well, you helped me name it. I've always conceptually, intuitively held on to that value or that idea, but you put a label on it, so that's pretty helpful for me. I just think that to me it means that you want to control the controllables, and you have a desired outcome that you're seeing, that you want a destination you want to arrive at, and it's kind of like what Justin said in his book. Build the life that you want. Build something that you can control. Now, we all know control is an illusion. Cancer happens, meteors happen. There's not a lot we really, really control in life. But the controllables that you can control, things like what your expenses are. We all use PMS software at some point. We have a provider we're a long way down the trail with, and a lot of breadcrumbs, and they decide, hey, our service is providing a lot more value than we're receiving, so we're going to increase, what we're requesting of you, as far as what your monthly cost is. That's something you can't control. Now, you can change providers, but they know what a pain it's going to be, but you're not likely to do that. And so they can incrementally make those increases. And, like any business, nothing is static. Everything changes and things get more expensive over time because that's inflation. But to a business owner, what really keeps me up at night is expense creep, managing expense creep. Almost every service you use, whether it's software as a service or vendors or everything, is more expensive now than it was 5 years ago. And guess what? In 2030, it's going to be more expensive than it is in 2026. So the question is, how can you manage that expense creep so that while your income does this, your expense creep does this?
Every time you show that is the second time you've done the income doing this, showing a rising graph, and expenses doing this, showing a flat line. I think it always takes me back to the asset at hand, right? This is what rental properties are so great for, right? If you're able to lock in a 30-year mortgage and you know that your income is going to increase over time because rents go up and all that stuff, and you keep your costs steady over time, that's the compounding effect of investing in rental properties. And I think that concept is it's so straightforward with rental properties. And I think I told you in our car ride, right? I listened to this founders podcast where he basically dives into the biographies of the most accomplished people in the world. This obsession with maintaining low expenses is one of those things, really controlling the controllables. What you just said is one of those things that is a common thread amongst great founders and great company builders and empire builders and stuff like that. Because if you can, I guess you can lock in, you can find revenue, but locking in revenue is really, really hard. Whereas if you can lock in a cost, that is like found revenue, right? Like any kind of like cost that you're locking in based on the fact that cost of things go up and stuff like that, or, and that's essentially found revenue that most people, when times are good, they're not thinking about that, right? Like they kind of take the eye off the ball of cost. And it's this, you mentioned Sam Walton, right? Like Walmart, it's this obsession of like when times are good to continue to like still dial in the cost part of it as controlling your liability for that and controlling your risk with that really is the foundation of a great business.
Definitely.
There's a couple of other things that I think you have, and that's essentially leverage, right? It's like how you can dial in on this leverage piece. There's a couple of things that I also noticed from our conversation. One is you have a very clear idea of who your client is and the type of housing stock you go after. Another is you invest in trust over time as leverage, and you've learned the lessons of like building that trust beyond just kind of like whoever you're doing business with. And the other is you see your franchise association with real property management as leverage. I'd love to kind of dive into those. Is there one that you want to jump in first?
Certainly. I can tell you just you had a firsthand front row seat of what we've experienced recently here in Middle Tennessee with the ice storm that
Mm-hmm.
occurred about a week and a half ago. The last of the people who were without power just received it yesterday in Nashville. I
Good to
think
hear.
as of 5 yesterday, there were less than 1,000 people left out of the 235,000 households that lost power from the ice storm. And of course, whenever you have ice, you have trees down, you have, all sorts of things that can happen with properties like frozen and bursted pipes, those types of things, which lead to what we call in the industry unpleasant conversations with owners and or difficult conversations. But those are opportunities to gain trust as far as how you handle those situations when they occur, but more importantly, how you groom or manage expectations before they occur. One of the things that we do when we onboard our owners is we convey that our value proposition that none of our peers have is my risk management and insurance expertise from a 25-year insurance career in property and casualty for the largest P&C company in the state of Tennessee. I've seen everything that can possibly happen to a property from a physical loss standpoint all the way to any type of liability loss. And so the four things that we want to convey to our owners is that we want to help them reclaim their time, provide them freedom to pursue their passions and high value activities that they care about most while providing safety and certainty. We want them to have the safety of knowing their asset is going to be protected. And not only their asset, but we are looking out for their assets from a liability standpoint in heading off things that could potentially be a legal threat from the way of litigation, where that could get into their pocketbook, and providing the certainty that they're going to receive their rents on time and that their property is going to be left better than when they brought it to us the first time. So we convey that on their onboarding. One of the best stories that I have that I share with our owners, and we all have these grand illusions of what we're going to do the first of the year. We're going to make all these changes and resolutions. We're going to time block. We're going to be more efficient. And I'm no different than anybody else from that standpoint. I remember December 2022 was going through that typical year-end self-evaluation and planning of what I'll do differently and do better in 2023. So the first business day of 2023 is a rainy January 3rd, and we had thunderstorms roll through Middle Tennessee between midnight and 3 a.m. with some pretty decent straight line winds. And I got a phone call at 7:30 in the morning from one of our dear residents in Franklin. And she and her, she's a retired school teacher, and she lives with and cares for her 90-year-old mother. And they were awoken at 7:05 by a loud crash. And she walks outside, and this massive hackberry tree has fallen on this house. And this is a $1 million piece of property in Franklin, Tennessee. And it just so happens it backs up to a small creek that runs through their neighborhood. And we had so much water overnight from the storm in such a short period of time that it had eroded the creek bed, and one of these trees basically gave way. So there go all my plans for how I was going to spend Monday, January 3rd, 2023, and all these grand illusions of how efficient I was going to be and things that were going to get done. And so I immediately sprang into action, drove up to the property, assessed the situation. Nobody was hurt, thankfully. The tree did fall right on top of the bedroom where her 90-year-old mother was staying. The branches poked through the roof decking, but thankfully did not penetrate the actual bedroom itself. By 11:30, I had a tree operator that had gotten a crane out there and gotten that tree off that house, tarped that roof. Insurance claim was filed by 1:30 that afternoon, and then I called the owner. Now, what do you think the owner thought about receiving that phone call? Obviously, they weren't happy that they've suffered this loss. Obviously, they're appreciative that they have insurance, and that's what it's for. Nobody likes paying for it. Everybody wants it when they need it. And the fact that her property manager had already evaluated, stabilized, and resolved the situation or put it on the road to resolution, and she never had to lift a finger.
That's where value's created right there. Yeah. And not just she didn't have to lift a finger, but I hear in that story, you saved her about 4 hours of anxiety, right? Like if you would have called her at 7:30 when that tree hit, as opposed to at 11:30 when tree's already off the roof, you know exactly what's going on. You got your arms around it and you're actually delivering some good news as well. I feel like that is just on a basic level, the most considerate way to deliver that message in a way that doesn't let her mind spin out afterwards, right?
Nobody wants to have a problem dropped in their lap without a solution. We try to raise our kids, don't think about what the challenges in front of you. Think about how you're going to deal with it. And, owners are relying on you and your expertise to manage their asset. I never want to bring a problem to an owner without a solution, because if they have to resolve it, then why do they need me? Why are they paying me? That's what I'm there for. I'm there to make problems go away. Our goal with our owners is to elevate their enjoyment of owning rental property. And we do that by eliminating the headaches, hassles, and challenges that come with it. Challenges like tenants that don't pay rent on time, or maybe don't take as good a care of their property as they ought to. Headaches like, Friday night phone calls at 10:30 p.m. that the HVAC has gone out in the middle of July in Middle Tennessee. Nobody wants a wedding or a special family event interrupted by something that's happening at their rental properties. That's what they're paying for. Anybody can receive a rent check. I mean, I don't go physically and go around collecting rent checks anymore. We have a great portal that our residents, direct deposit their money in every month on the first. And, that part, that's not work. That's easy. And we pay a service for that, but I mean, that's not a big deal. But that's not what our owners are paying for. Our owners are paying for us to carry around the mental bricks that come with owning rental property so that they don't have to. So that when they're on vacation with their family or they're at their daughter's graduation, that they don't get that text or that phone call that there's an emergency that demands their attention right then and there, that ruins that moment and that experience for them. That's what they're paying for. They're paying for not having to deal with that.
I don't know if I brought this up on our ride, but like I had just listened to, I ended up listening to it three times, right? Like Tony Klein's conversation with Darius Rutna. Darius is this guy in Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not sure exactly where, that had a 100-door company, absorbed an 800-door company, became a 900-door company. Really good ideas around, scale and building and technology and stuff like that. And he described this concept that is property management has defined work and undefined work, right? Like there's the defined work is essentially the instructions that everybody needs to follow to bring something to completion. It's a lot of like the coordination, the the moving the thing through, right? Like the approvals, the confirmation, the follow-up, all these kinds of things, the SOPs, all that good stuff. And then there's the undefined work, which is knowing when to show up and really, really be there, right? Like the human judgment side of things. And he talks about how most of the work in property management, like 60 to 80%, is the defined work, and the minority is the undefined work. But it's the undefined work where the meaning shows up, the thing that moves the needle really, really happens. And as like in all the stories that you've told me from this one or that cupping story of like somebody just giving you a new home and finding that the hardwood had cupped underneath the fridge, and how you approach bringing things that happened, like things that went wrong inside of a property to your owners. I can't help to think that you're like the master of, or at least you have mastered this, like the undefined side of the business, which is how to break bad news to someone, how to show up for a tough conversation, how to be fully prepared before you show up to a tough conversation. And that's where you're deriving all this value, right? Like, as this, that's where my head goes when I heard that story. It's like you spend your time living in the, like, you're very clear about what you bring to your clients. You're not bringing rent collection. That is defined work that you have gotten off your plate. You are bringing to them peace of mind and uninterrupted time away from whatever property they own, and you don't bring them headaches, is essentially where you define your value.
We do the worrying for them so they don't have to.
Yeah, well, and you do the boring for him, and then you know how to bring them the not boring, right?
Yes.
Like,
I'd say the challenge that a lot of property management professionals face, and we're no different, and we have to find a way to do this, is there are so many things that we do that our owners never hear about. Things we don't charge for that we do that they don't know about. Problems we resolve that they don't know about. They hear from us at times when bad things happen, like ice storms and storm damage or tenants that don't pay rent. But we have to find a way to communicate not only when there are unpleasant conversations. We need to find opportunities to touch base without intruding on their time, but in a way that lets them know and creates visibility for the little things that we do that create value, but are not noticeable, or they're pretty much invisible to them. We have to find a better way of doing that.
yeah, yeah. Me. I worship at the altar of KTAs, right? So how do you avoid the kitchen table arguments, and then like show up where it's like every time I see your name on my phone, it's not an anxiety inducing event. I think
Yes.
is really real. That's
Oh
actually
my
something.
goodness, Tim's calling. Something's really bad.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that JWB taught me, right? Like you know, they were telling me, as like I've told you all about JWB now, right? When they were just a young company with a handful of investors that they're managing companies for. Their first investor was one of the founder, Alex Ifakas's, his mom. Right? She
Wow.
like they used his mom's 401k to buy some of these properties, and mom let it ride with him. And there was a moment where he called his mom, and she was just like, "God, Alex, every time I see your name on my phone, I get this like panic attack because I think
Yeah,
something bad's happening at the property." And that was
exactly.
a major aha moment for them, as far as like, oh, we need to engineer these positive touch points in order to build these relationships so that we're not seen as the bearers of bad news. We're seen as like the people that are, trusted partners and stuff like that. You told me a really good story of understanding to not just go, like, that you have to do that with the client, but you've also learned that you have to bring in the spouse at times and build that relationship. You want to tell me that story of how you can't just take someone's word for, you can't just be like, oh, they're the decision maker, I just deal with a decision maker kind of like story.
Sure, I'd be glad to. And it's so much easier to follow the path of least resistance,
Yeah.
and it's lazy. It takes effort to not take the path of least resistance. And I've found in business, not only in property management, but in prior business, that it's really important for all the stakeholders to have regular communication from you to create trust, preserve relationships, and get great outcomes. I parallel that to talking about life insurance. I'm a licensed property and casualty life and health agent, have been for 30 years in Tennessee. Nobody likes buying life insurance. Life insurance is a promise on a piece of paper that you hope to never use, that you're paying money for. And from that standpoint, I can't tell you how many times in my young agent career when I was just starting out that I would, have a client in my office, and maybe they were about to buy a house, their largest investment ever at that point in their life. And, we would always bring the conversation around to, well, what have you done as far as your life insurance planning? Because if something happens to you and you get hit by a bus or you get cancer, you've got this huge mortgage. Do you want your wife and children at a time of grief to have to be ripped away from everything they've ever known as far as the familiarity of their home? They've already lost you, which is horrible. but now they're going to have to move because financially they can't sustain the life that you've created for them. And if I could tell you a way that I could solve that for you, and it would only cost you a little bit per month, would that be something you'd be interested in? Yeah. What person doesn't want to provide for their family, whether it's a mom or a dad? But invariably, when you have that conversation, yeah, I think I want to do that. And they go home, and maybe the other spouse is maybe they're the spender and the other spouse is the saver. And the other spouse has their finger on the pulse of, what income and outgo is. And, oh, no, that's way too expensive. We can't afford that right now. So I spent an hour in my office selling something that was a tremendous value to my client, only to have them go home and have their spouse unsell it. So in property management, it's really important that as a property manager, all the stakeholders, as far as your owner is concerned, are involved, whether it's their spouse, whether it's multiple siblings who own a property together, because you never know what's around the corner. And that decision maker that it was comfortable and easy to have conversations with, who could make decisions, who relied and trusted your judgment and advisement, they're not in the picture anymore. And if you have not made the investments in communication and relationship building with the other stakeholders, whether it's his or her spouse or siblings or whoever, you're going to run up against a challenge that you really manufactured, because that other party doesn't have the same relationship you had with the primary decision maker. We had an owner who, he and his wife purchased a really nice house here in Nashville, coming from out of state, and they intended to move here. And right before their move, he had a massive stroke, and obviously a tremendous setback for him physically. And it was not really a good time for them to follow through with their move, because he needed to be close to his doctors and his medical care. And he just was not, they weren't in a position to where they were ready to make that move. So I managed this asset for him. It's a $1.6 million house, found great tenants, took great care of the property, had a great relationship with him, loved working with him. I built trust, but I've received trust. So after that trust was built, he was easy to work with. It was easy, the path of least resistance. Unfortunately, he stepped into eternity, and I'm left with the other stakeholder, his spouse, which unfortunately I had not built a great relationship with, had not taken the time to intentionally build a relationship with. And she received some really horrible advice, real estate wise, from somebody who took advantage of her and her grief. And because I had not developed the relational capital with her, my advisement was not able to overcome that bad advice. And she ended up basically fire selling this house. And, you say, well, it's her money. She can do with what she wants. Yeah, that's true. But our job as asset managers is to provide the information to the client so that they arrive at the right decision. A lot of times your client doesn't make the wrong decision because they're just stupid or ignorant. It's because you haven't done a good job in providing them the information they need to make the right decision. Does that make sense? And so from that standpoint, it's really important. We have a property that 4 siblings own together. Their sister passed away, and so they all own this rental property co-equally. Obviously, there's one person that's the decision maker, and one thing that we really that we're adamant about in our business when we onboard multiple stakeholders who own a property is we have them sign a letter of understanding that this person that they've chosen is their point person. And that's the point person that we deal with. That's the one that makes the decisions, that gives us authorizations and green lights and red lights when needed, because we can't have four chefs stirring the pot. We've got to deal with one. But we communicate equally with all of them. We let all of them know what's going on, because if my point person gets hit by a bus, or cancer happens, or those types of things, I've got to have a good relationship with the other stakeholders, his siblings. And if I have not taken the time to make those investments, then guess what? I haven't learned a thing from this prior example that I illustrated with our client and his wife and his death. So really, really important that we as property managers take the time to build those relationships with all the stakeholders, not just the one it's easiest to communicate with. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Like, I think it's one of those things, like when you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I need to do this. If I'm putting myself in the shoes of a property manager that's like listening to us have this conversation right now, chasing a whole bunch of other things, right? Like I'm drowning in other work and I don't have time to keep up with something like this. I guess I've never been a property manager, but from what I understand, it's like some folks approach it like you approach it and have the time in their day to like spend on stuff like this. And other folks are consistently putting out fires. I wonder, as you grew in property management, were you able to like have the discipline to do this stuff because you learned this from the insurance side, or has this been something that you have been able to like implement over time in property management?
I think I probably bring it into the property management business from my prior career in insurance.
Yeah.
You see people at their best and at their worst. You know, they just got a big promotion, or they just moved here and they're buying their house, or it's a young couple buying their first house. Those are happy times. And those are, yes, you love having those conversations. But then there are really unhappy times. A 17-year-old son makes a foolish decision while he's driving and somebody gets hurt. Lightning strikes a house in the middle of the night and burns it to the ground. Cancer, people die. Those are all unpleasant times. So you see people at their very best and you see people at their worst. And you have a unique perspective on their situation because you, as the insurance agent, get to look behind the curtain, so to speak, at all their finances. When you're trying to decide, is this a risk I want to put my company on? How do they maintain their property? Is this something that's going to cost us money? You're underwriting somebody for life insurance. What is their general health state? What are their habits? You learn so much about people because you're putting a bet. You're putting your company is entrusting you to make a bet. Is this risk going to be a moneymaker for us or a loser for us? An insurance company never asks an agent to underwrite a tornado. You can't underwrite a tornado. You don't know when they're going to happen, where they're going to happen, if they're going to hit your property or not. It's impossible to underwrite a tornado. But if you write a bad risk, you take on a client who they either don't have the resources or just from sheer neglect don't take care of their property. It's a guaranteed loss. I had a mentor in my business that told me if the CEO of a company came to your office after a loss, you pushed the file across your desk to him or her and they looked at it. Could you defend your decision why you put the company on that risk? So we get the opportunity in that industry, unlike probably any other. We get to see everything. We get to hear everything. That's a tremendous advantage for me in my new role in being a broker owner of a property management company. Because property management is such a misnomer. We don't really manage property. We manage people. We manage owners, their expectations, their doubts, their fears. We manage residents. We provide something very valuable. We provide housing to people who need it to help them live the lives that they want to live. We manage vendors. We want to make sure that we've got trusted, vetted, and insured people taking care of our owners' assets, that they respond quickly, that they provide a level of expertise to do the job right, hopefully the first time, that they minimize the inconvenience to the residents. So we're managing people. We're managing expectations. We're managing outcomes. And from that standpoint, being able to do that in a way that creates value for people is why they turn to us.
It's kind of reinforcing. I think I'm going to just start calling you the master of undefined work. Like this is just like it just drips off of you, man. Your ability to understand what really really matters and prioritize relationships in this industry and those like judgment points and delivering, like the soft skills around all of it just kind of drips off you, which is why I wanted to have this conversation. You mentioned something to me before we started this, and it's you come with this like whole soft skill set and hard skill set, right? Because you've been in the insurance industry, and you greatly value the leverage you called it of being part of a national franchise like Real Property Management. Tell me a little bit more about that. I'm always curious to understand the value prop of the franchise versus going at it on your own.
Well, certainly. One of the things that attracted me to a property management company is because it already was in my wheelhouse as far as I've dealt with properties for a long career. It was just on a different side of the desk. I have a vetted, trusted, dependable, deep bench of vendors that our clients have utilized to restore their house to their pre-loss condition, regardless of what Mother Nature threw their way or a tenant slipping and falling. I actually had a strange case. I had a client who, in one of their rentals, a ceiling fan. This is when I was in the insurance business and I insured this rental property for them. They had a guest that was spending the weekend there, and the ceiling fan in the guest bedroom, I don't know if it was installed improperly or if it vibrated off the collar that holds it up in the ceiling. It literally fell. It fell off the ceiling onto their guest while they were sleeping in the bed. Thankfully, the guest wasn't hurt, and didn't get hit in the head. Have to go to the ER and get a an MRI and traumatic head injury and all this other stuff. All the things, of course, the commercials you see on TV from our brethren in the legal profession who are, if you were harmed by such and such, call us and we'll get the money you deserve. Those are things that's real. That happens. Ask any trucking company owner if they're a liability magnet for being sued when their trucks are involved in an accident. So, from that perspective, you just know that bringing that knowledge into the property management sphere is just so useful. And so one of the things that attracted me to real property management is, a lot of success in business are systems and processes. And like you and I talked about in the car, success leaves clues. I study successful people. Everybody has to run their own race and everybody's journey is unique to them, but success leaves clues. And there's a reason why when you take a recipe and you follow it exactly to the T, you get a great outcome. You get a great pie, you get a great whatever. And in this business, there are processes and systems and things they have a track record. They are successful. So you can either choose to gain knowledge through experience or wisdom. We talked about, I always said, my grandfather said, son, there's two ways to gain knowledge in life. He said, the first way is through wisdom. And the second way is through experience. He said, wisdom is the knowledge you gain before you make the mistake. Experience is the knowledge you gain after you've made the mistake. And life goes much better for you if you gain knowledge through wisdom rather than experience. But sometimes we all have to go to the University of Experience. And so one of the things that was important to me was to gain as much knowledge about this business and how to make it work and how to serve people and flatten that learning curve. And participating as an owner in our franchise system of real property management enabled us to flatten that learning curve. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There are 460 offices nationwide with about 72,000 doors under management. It's a great organization. From day one, the onboarding and support that we received from real property management in our home office in Dallas, Texas, those folks are amazing. They really flattened that learning curve for us. And there are a lot of people who are like, well, franchises are like, you have to share. I don't like to share. I want to keep it all myself. Well, that's fine if you don't mind climbing that learning curve and gaining knowledge through experience rather than through wisdom. I'm 56 years old. I'm in the fourth quarter of my career. I don't have 20 years to learn this business. And so it was really important to me that I enter into it with a partner who gave me the best opportunity for success, my wife and I, because we run this business together. And so real property management has been a great partner. The franchise support that they provide us from a system standpoint, the leverage and economies of scale we get from all the toys and technologies that they negotiate special pricing with all the national vendors really help us as a smaller operator. We're less than 100 doors, but we're growing with quality. Help us to be able to do things that normally you have to be an operator, 400 or 500 doors to be able to use those tools and technologies. They've been a great partner for us, and yes, they deserve value from that too. And we pay a royalty on the revenue that we receive, and that's just, you signed up for the trip. That's part of it. But they've been a great value add for us in flattening that learning curve and helping us to be successful and take great care of our clients.
I feel like you're like I call my wife Marta, like I call her like she's like our world-class procurement department, because before we buy anything, she's going to like research the heck out of it. Kind of like, you ever read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell?
Yes.
How the archetype of the maven. I don't know if I'm like thinking too much into it, but I feel like you're one of those folks that like when you make a meaningful investment like that, you've really researched it and you understand the differences of it. And just based on how you follow the property management industry these days and how much you stay on top of stuff. If I'm a property manager, I don't know, maybe I'm a real estate broker that started managing about 10 doors and I'm like, I want to take property management seriously. And I look around and there's coaching programs, right? There's the YouTube University, right? Like that's we won't call that shortcutting the earned knowledge kind of thing, right? Because you still got to like parse through a bunch of stuff. But I would say like comparable in today's environment would be like a coaching program, really investing in a coaching program that could help me build this business and get it up and running. That has a certain investment and that investment has a chance to just kind of like end, right? And then there's the investment in a franchise like real property management. How would you how would you guide someone to making that decision of like what's the difference in that? Like how do you price that type of thing when you if you were that person?
I think that somebody looking at I've always thought the easiest way to make a decision is take a legal pad, draw a line straight down the middle of the page, put pros on one side and cons on the other. I think for me, having a partner who has skin in the game is important because real property management has a wonderful brand and they've got a great reputation and a name they want to protect. So they have skin in the game. They have a vested interest in their operators succeeding. Now, that doesn't mean that every operator succeeds. You can only control the controllables. Everything looks great on paper, but when life happens, that's when you find out whether you made a good decision or not. It's kind of like a loan. You're a banker making a loan. As long as the financials look good going in, the loan was good when you made it. It doesn't mean it's going to stay good. And so from that standpoint, the franchise is also making a bet on you and they're vetting you as an owner operator. Is this somebody that, has not only the financial ability, but also just do they have the soft skills to be successful in this business? Are they coachable? Are they teachable? Each franchisee in real property management, we have a coach and we're grouped together in peer groups based on where we are from a revenue standpoint and a size standpoint. And one of the things I really love about this industry, because it's different from anything I've ever experienced, is how willing everyone is to share and the culture of sharing, not only amongst within our system of real property management and our owners, but also other operators in the industry that are our competitors. NARPM is a great resource for us in bringing us together, enabling us to have conversations to help us elevate our businesses and take better care of our people and deliver great outcomes. The culture of sharing in the property management industry, I think, is really unique. There's an attitude of abundance. There's enough business for everybody. We're not so much competing with each other as we are trying to create great outcomes for our clients and in so doing elevate the industry. And when we elevate the industry, you've heard of the term, it's cliche, but it's true, a rising tide lifts all boats. When everybody is doing what we do at a high level of expertise, it lifts all of us. And that culture of sharing is so valuable. So for somebody looking to get into this business, do I go it alone? Do I have enough knowledge maybe from what I did before, whether I'm a real estate professional or maybe I'm in construction or something of that nature? Is franchising the way to go versus just trying to learn it on my own? I think there's a lot of variables that go into that calculus. What type of time horizon do you have? We started this at 50. My wife and I are 50 years old. We're not spring chickens. If I was doing this again at 30, maybe I wouldn't do the franchise thing if I had some prior experience, which gave me the confidence that I had a great chance of succeeding because I had the time to outlive the mistakes and overcome the mistakes, to gain that knowledge through experience, albeit painful at times, that I had the time to overcome that. Well, when you're starting a business at 50, you don't have the same luxury of time. And so, we talk about our economy, and I saw a report this morning when I was, having my breakfast, that the amount of layoffs that occurred in the month of January were staggering, and how in spite of economic growth, we're seeing GDP increase, but we're seeing companies shed headcount left and right. The stock market usually rewards companies that slash seats because they think that that company has found a more efficient way to do something with fewer people, and therefore will be more profitable and earnings per share will be higher. So the market rewards that. But if you're one of the ones who was in a seat that got slashed, that's a tragedy for you. That's not a rounding error. That's a job. That's being able to provide for your family and pay for your mortgage and all those things. And so there are a lot of people who are going to be in a boat where, they thought they were going to be with the same company. Maybe it's their third or fourth company in their career, but the same company through their, retirement age. I don't think anybody can really count on that anymore. And when you get into your, your 40s, 50s, and you're earning a good amount of money, there's always a bean counter in the head shed, we call it, in the home office who's looking for a more efficient way to do something. And one of the quickest ways to improve the bottom line is to cut headcount, particularly headcount that's, costing the most money. And so if you're looking to get into property management as a fourth quarter career, I think the franchise way provides the best path to success.
Got it. So it sounds like in your head, there's there's different stratifications of risk mitigation, right? There's go at it alone with YouTube University is probably, it's the riskiest. There's the join a coaching program formally. That's another level of helping you out. And then there's the franchise model with RPM that has the coaching element. I didn't realize that you guys had such a vibrant kind of like mastermind group coaching element.
Yes.
Along with, I knew that you get purchasing power, right? Like we've been negotiating with RPM now for a year, so you guys get better purchasing power, which of course you will receive as soon as we sign those papers.
I'm counting on it. I'm gonna hold you to it, Pablo.
I remember. I remember you telling me in the car that the moment we signed that deal, not to forget about you. And I'm very much a believer of I think, man, that to me is one of those undefined work, soft skills that most businesses don't, that I see people make the mistake in over and over again. Like your first customers should never be paying you more than your newest customers, right? Like you should when you reach scale, you should then give that, that experience right back to the people that helped you get to that scale. So yeah, definitely got you there, man. But yeah, it's interesting how property management has become, it's almost like it's gone from nobody talks about property management to, thanks to multiple context shifts, right? Like the great generational wealth transfer, I think what's happening in the economy in the turbulent times. And I think for this conversation, it's kind of like the growth of entrepreneur through acquisition as a business model and educators of those kinds of things, and the benefits of property management, right? Like the recurring revenue, the scalable process and all that stuff. It has become one of these things where, as a, if you're a knowledge worker in your, like you say, fourth quarter of your career, and your company isn't necessarily growing, and there's no way that you're just going to replace your salary by going somewhere else, or you don't want to be on that hamster wheel, it becomes this option to go choose this entrepreneurial path. But maybe folks that aren't so used to the entrepreneurial path, the franchise option really mitigates that risk, right? Like mitigates that experience of everything is infinite and I don't know what to do next. And, I need someone just kind of guiding me along, man. So it's an interesting time we're in for this industry, man. Tim, my last question for you, I'm just curious. I realize you asked me this to start the show, and I didn't ask you it back. What's your opinion of where we're going to be in a year with agentic, right? Like you're somebody that's, you're clearly immersed in it. You're using it. You've seen kind of the results of it. What do you think? And you are reading up about the future. You obviously, I have a feeling you're 10x deeper into this Molt book thing than I am.
It's crazy. It is crazy.
It is crazy. What do you think? What do you think happens in the next 12 months with AI and property management?
I'm really excited about the prospect of what it can do. The mindset shift of moving from looking at AI as a tool to looking at AI as a teammate, thinking about how it can be a force multiplier. I'm really excited about Tyler Nelson, one of your associates, is doing a webinar for us next week about how to train the trainer, how to train your AI. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around what is this? Is this a box with a bunch of chips and ones and zeros? And, this is actually a thing that can make a decision now and own an outcome. And am I really going to trust it to do that? I can't look at it like a tool. I can't look at it like software. If I look at it like a teammate that can make decisions and own outcomes, then I better get good at finding a way how to train it and teach it and provide the inputs necessary to provide quality outputs. And so I'm really excited about what the next 12 months hold. I think that it enables us to really, really maintain our position on fixed cost scaling. So as we grow with quality owners, quality properties, that we're able to do that while keeping expense creep in check. And so, we're at the place now where we're a small operation. We're a very profitable operation, but we're a small operation from the standpoint of the headcount. We're excited about finding ways that we can continue to keep our headcount low and the quality of outcomes high as we grow. And if, in fact, the promise of what agentic AI purports to be able to do and what you're an evangelist of, if it does come to fruition, man, it's going to be good.
I agree, man. It's just a matter of how quickly we get there, right?